Kiran Kapoor from the Cambridge Marketing College. I'm at the Imperial War Museum at Duxford, which was the venue of the Cambridge Digital Marketing Conference. And my guest this week is Rob Welsby of Further. Rob, welcome. You've just finished your talk and you were talking about using data to inform content marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you said there were three key challenges that content marketing had.
Yeah, so for the talk I thought I'd practice what we preach really and actually look at data to inform the content that I was presenting in my talk. So a recent survey of in-house marketers conducted by the Content Marketing Institute basically highlighted the biggest challenges that content marketers face and in-house marketers faced, which was creating good content consistently, creating content that was really engaging, and how to measure that content.
Yeah, because I think all marketers can be guilty of just churning out content rather than actually thinking it through. So you had some techniques on how to look at creating the content.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating content consistently is something that marketers do face as a challenge, especially in B2B businesses where you feel that you run out of topics to talk about quite quickly. I talked through something called the skyscraper technique, which is where you can use various tools, including Google Suggest and a platform called BuzzSumo, to actually help you to identify the questions that your target audience are actually asking. You can also use social media sites like Quora and Reddit to give you that sort of insight. And then actually looking at the search results and seeing how you can produce content that's more engaging, that's easily shareable, that's actually going to do a better job and answer the user's need better than what already exists. So the great example that we looked at was in preparation for the talk, I was looking at big data as a topic. So I put big data into BuzzSumo and it comes up with a website called Pokemon versus Big Data. So I looked at it and it's actually a really simple website which shows you the name, shows you a name, a word, and you have to choose whether that is the name of a Pokemon character or whether it's the name of a big data service or platform. And so, yeah, it's sort of making lighter humour, I think, of some of the slightly unusual names that big data providers have tended to choose for their platforms.
So Skyscraper allowed you to actually look at, you put in the questions that your people ask, have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, so you research the questions that your customers are asking, you look at the search results and you see what's already ranking, and the Pokemon versus big data is a good example of that. And if you go onto the website that appears when you search for that, you'll notice that at the bottom it's actually got a credit link, and the credit link goes through to a Google form, which actually has exactly the same content, exactly the same idea, concept, but just not produced in an engaging, shareable way. And the idea of skyscraper content, or as Rand Fishkin from SEO Moz would call it, times 10 content, you're actually aiming to take inspiration from content that already exists, but doing a better job at it, so making it more shareable, more engaging, and then actually using that inspiration to create your own content. So it's building on the shoulders of not so much giants, perhaps, to produce your own content, and actually by doing so, you know that you're answering a customer need, an interest that already has value. But the real benefit of the technique is that you can actually use the content that you're producing for a number of different marketing deliverables. So you can use it for paid social advertising to drive traffic to engaging content. You can use it in your email marketing methods. But one of the most valuable lessons from my point of view as an SEO by trade, I guess, is actually looking at all of the websites that have linked to the existing assets that you've taken inspiration from, and then actually you've got there a ready built outreach list to go to all of those websites and say, we've actually produced something better, why don't you link to this?
Mm-hmm. And that sort of brings us on to engaging content. You used an example of Jawbone.
Yeah, absolutely. So data is something that can inform us as marketers, but it's also something that can form content in its own right. So I showed a number of examples of that content, including Jawbone, the fitness tracker company, have produced some really engaging content with the huge amount of data that they have about when people are sleeping, when people are actually walking about. So, for example, in New York, you can see very clear trends in the data where there are kind of bars where people are at the weekends doing a huge amount of walking around New York City. In contrast to somewhere like Orlando in Florida, where there's no real kind of pattern to the data because of the usage habits of the people there, where people are kind of on holiday or often retired. So there's just kind of a mush of data. And the only really standout point is you can see very clearly within the sort of raw data when Disney have run their running events and the Disney Marathon happened in Orlando. You can see very clearly when those particular things have happened. But that sort of data used to produce content can really help establish credibility and authority as a company, especially in the example of Jawbone.
I suppose it could also make you feel slightly uncomfortable about the amount of data they've got, but yes, but in this instance they're using it for engaging content. And the final thing you talked about was measuring results, which, as you said, is quite hard to do, but you had some very key things to...
Absolutely. So there are all sorts of metrics that you can use to measure the ROI, I guess, of your content marketing. So the obvious ones being the amount of traffic, the amount of conversions that you've had, the direct revenue, things like the amount of social shares, the amount of links that your content is acquiring. But I think the most important thing when you're looking to measure content is actually understanding what the purpose of that content is supposed to be. And thinking about the user journey, the user life cycle. If you're producing content that's talking to people at the start of their journey when they're kind of initially researching, it's not particularly going to show you in a good light as a marketer if you're trying to measure the performance of that content by looking at revenue, because it's too early in that process. So you should be measuring things like the amount of traffic it's driven, the amount of engagement that you've had with that content. Has that content resulted in a high number of new visits to your website versus returning visitors who already know about you as a brand? And then one of the metrics that I really like in Google Analytics, which many companies are now using, is something called page value, which over any period of time will show you, if you've got your conversion tracking set up correctly, will show you the pounds or sterling value that a user has actually contributed, or a page of content on your site has actually contributed. So you can look at all the content on your website and say, how much revenue has this actually helped me to drive, even if that visit came to the website 4 months after initially seeing a piece of content and ultimately converts. So it's a really powerful tool to look at the long-term value of content that you're producing.
So what does it do? It tracks people that are coming as each stage that they come to your website? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So page value is basically the amount of revenue generated by a customer divided by the unique page views of that particular page content. So if a page on your website never contributes to your ultimate revenue at any point ever, then that's going to show up as a 0 page value that's got no value to your business whatsoever. Whereas content that has an important part to play, and the obvious examples would be things like checkout pages and things, but you'd expect them to be high. They will have a really high value. What's most interesting is to look at that mid-tier of content. So, for example, to look at all your blog posts and see what the relative page value of all of those are, because those that outperform your site average is content that you should be producing more of, and content that's got a lower page value than your average might need improving or actually might not be providing much value to you at all.
So one of the things I find quite interesting with content is, do I have to keep reproducing content all the time? Could it feel like a treadmill? Or should I be repurposing my content?
I think increasingly for brands it's becoming a balance of content creation and also content curation. So it doesn't always have to be content that you're producing yourself. You could curate it and present it with your own kind of spin, or just actually present it in a really neat and formatted way, kind of a weekly roundup maybe. Producing content consistently can be quite important, but it's actually most important to think about whether your content's adding value. I would much prefer to see a website that's only producing content every 6 months if that content is genuinely really valuable, rather than just churning out stuff for the sake of it and finding ultimately that it's not really giving you any benefit whatsoever.
Yeah, I suppose there's that awful moment where the piece of content that you've slaved over and created, and then you discover that actually it's either not being read or it's not producing anything useful.
Absolutely, yeah. And one thing I would say is that if you're investing a lot of money into content, to make sure that you're maximising the value that you get from it. So if you've got a decent content idea, it could not only live as a blog post or an article, but you could create video content around that. You could use a spin on that content as the basis of an email marketing campaign. And if it's engaging users of your brand, you can use that as the landing page for kind of social media advertising, for your organic social media efforts. You could even look at commissioning research around that topic to use as a digital PR kind of angle as well. So one really good idea can actually be used in pretty much all the channels and all the formats available to digital marketers, which kind of maximises the benefit.
And on that nice positive note, Rob Welsby, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.